Okay, starting to record. Let me share my screen. Okay, do you see the PowerPoint screen, just to make sure?
Yes.
Okay.
It's okay.
Okay, great. We can get going. Basically, as you can see, probably haven't seen it yet, we are actually starting to use our Rook logo. It's as a separate logo from SUKAD, although this is officially, both are still SUKAD. Today's topic is project management methodology and CAMP. So I will keep it brief and focusing on the term and the terminology. And later on at the end, I'll have just a few slides on CAMP. Okay. Please be patient with us. Just as a general admin note, this is the first time, as I mentioned earlier. We did everything to avoid any tech issues, but you probably know Murphy. So I hope we don't have Murphy visiting us today. Your role in the presentation is to keep your mic on mute until given an opportunity to speak, and I will give you plenty of opportunity to speak and ask questions as we go through the presentation. Ideally, and those who know me and have taken a workshop with me, they probably know that I'm very interactive. I like to ask a lot of questions. Unfortunately, with an online medium and with many participants, it's hard to control. So we will learn as we go forward in these seminars and webinars is that how can we do it more interactive. So for today, what I will try to do is that every once in a while, I'll just give you every once in a while, meaning every few slides, I'll give you an opportunity to ask questions. And of course, at the end, we'll have plenty of time to answer any questions. Okay, SUKAD purpose is to help organization drastically increase shareholder value. I do not want to expand a lot on this because I do not want to convert this into a commercial for SUKAD. I just want to mention this is our focus and our primary goal at the company is to help organization improve shareholder value. And as we shift to this next slide, I need to focus on this new initiative that we just launched as a servant leader initiative. And I came up with this as I was working on my personal website. And for those of you who have seen the image before, actually, this is a new image. You probably see it for the first time. Allow me to explain a little bit about this. And the purpose of this SLI, Servant Leader Initiative, is that to help organizations, individuals, and startup. This is an addition that we just added, to enhance their knowledge and know-how and the application of project management in a real-world setting. So basically, my focus is applied project management. And for those who've been following some of my work and SUKAD work, you would know that our emphasis is on the application of project management. Also is to help or enable organizations to raise the level of project management maturity and to deliver their product and solution to market faster and at lower cost. That part of the initiative is that to offer these services and support on a complimentary free basis. And the way we are grouping this right now, if you look at the image, is that we have three core groups. If I go to the orange one, it's that individuals, I focus on individuals. And the way we're doing this is that through advisory session, and this is designed for manager and senior manager in companies who would like to talk about project management for their company, improving project management in their company, implementing project management or organization. So it's more an organizational focus, but it's one-on-one discussion with a senior manager or an executive in that organization. And then we have the coaching session, and that is focused on individuals. So basically, if any individual would like to book time with me, you will be able to do so. If I move to the blue, it's basically a group discussion, such as the webinar we're doing right now. And these will be weekly, structured around the topic. And we have already scheduled the first six webinar. And then every Saturday, we will have what we call group discussion. And this will be open discussion. It could be totally open with no topic, or for this coming Saturday, our focus is on Agile. And the reddish site is something we're just announcing. I haven't officially announced yet, but we will be officially announcing in the next few days, which is support for startup. I have been asked to volunteer to work with startup that focus on women in AI, and it came to mind, said, if I need to support a startup, and this has been coming into my mind for a long time, is that what can we do to support startup? So we have this here. I wanted to start with this because I want you to know that there are, beside the webinar, there are other opportunities where you can get a meeting with me one-on-one on a complimentary basis to help you, support you in any way we can. Today's topic is project management methodology, and it's structured around 4 major categories or topics. And when I say major, I mean, obviously, we're not going to spend an hour on each, just a few minutes, and each one of those have 2 topics. So we will start with talking about method versus methodology, and methodology versus framework, and setting the scene. Then we'll talk about project management methodology, which means what is a PM methodology or a PM method? We need to define that. Because unless we have a definition on this, then everyone can use the word method or methodology for anything they wish, which is fine, but it will not align to what we were discussing. And then we will highlight the essential component based on our definition of what consists of what makes a PM methodology or a PM method. Then we shift to the community misunderstanding on Agile and Waterfall, and I will close with CAMMP and SUKAD. And just to keep things brief and to focus on getting a lot of question and the reaction, our focus is that technically each one of these subtopics that you see on the outer ring here is 1 slide or maybe 2 at most. With this, let's move to setting the scene. And in this case, we're going to discuss 2 topics, as we mentioned. What are the differences between in the definition of method versus methodology, and what's the difference between method or methodology and framework? We often use the term method and methodology interchangeably, which is fine. However, if you want to be a little bit more academic about it, there is a difference between the 2, and that difference is important to realize. And the same thing with methodology versus framework. As I mentioned, I will have a header slide for each one of the topics, and then maybe 1 slide for each one of these here. And then we will pause and take a couple of questions. And this way we can try to, instead of having you listening to me for 45 minutes, we will basically do a topic with a subtopic, take a couple of questions, and then we move on to the next topics, and we continue the process like this. Okay, so method versus methodology. Well, let's define method. Dictionary definition and other definition is that a method, and allow me to read here, is typically something very specific, a method of doing something. So there is a method, there is a procedure in a way, step-by-step process, such as, you follow the step 1, step 2, step 3. Also, the word method usually means something unique about doing something particular to get a specific result. I know this is some fancy wording, but it's basically said, okay, what is the method of going from A to B? And then there will be steps to follow. So a method is usually something specific about doing something and getting specific result. The word methodology is the science of method, which means what? I mean, you've heard biology, geology, psychology, all these terms that have those few letters at the end and indicate the science. For example, obviously geology is the science, the studies of geography. Biology is about the body, right? So when you add basically, so in project management context, the word methodology, or in general, not necessarily project management, so whenever the difference between method and methodology, method is something very specific, Whereas on the other hand, methodology is a set of method. So basically we can say what the methodology for X, Y, or Z, and that typically consists maybe of few methods within it, as you can see, as we define it later on when it comes to project management. Now, methodology versus framework, I've already defined methodology. So what's a framework? Where a framework is typically a general guideline that an organization can adopt. Okay, so it's a general, it's not something very, I mean, obviously it could include things like policies, procedures, guideline, but it's not a specific method. It's basically the sum of all these things. So for example, the framework could include components such as policies, procedures, processes, guideline, right? For example, PMI PMBOK guide, a lot of people are familiar with it. Technically, we say the PMBOK guide, for guideline on how to develop a project management framework. So the PMBOK guide is not a methodology. Yeah? It is more of a guideline that organization can take it and develop their framework using it the PMI way of doing things. In SUKAD, usually you've heard us probably use the term SUKAD way, and that SUKAD way is the project management framework that we are building and we have been developing and enhancing since 2007. Questions? You can jump in and ask questions. I'll take a couple of questions because technically this is the end of the first scene. Anyone want to jump in?
Monir, can we talk about frameworks like organizational internal standards?
That's a good question. There is a difference between the word framework and a standard.
Internal standard.
Yeah, a standard is that usually there might be a standard for managing a project or standard for managing. So a standard by definition is an official, I mean, again, we can use the word loosely any way we want to. However, in general, if once we use the term standard, that means there is something that has been formalized, typically acknowledged by some authority. So like the ISO standard, the PMI NC standard for managing project. So a standard is typically provide general information, and that usually is vetted by some kind of an organization, ISO, NC, or anybody else, and label that document as a standard. Now, in that definition, the standard would be part of a framework. Because a framework include more things. The framework is a kind of a loose guideline that include policies, procedures, processes, standard. For example, the standard for managing a single project, and PMI have something which is basically included in the PMBOK guide. The standard for managing organization project, the standard for maybe building a PMO. So a standard is a formal document that usually sanctioned or accredited or reviewed by a standardization committee in a given country or by ISO. So standard is slightly different than a framework. It's a subset of a framework.
Can we conceive that frameworks are inside the organizational process assets, OPA?
Yeah, I mean, technically, you use the term OPA, I use the term OPM, which is organizational project management, right? PMI use the term OPA as organizational process asset.
Yeah.
Correct. So basically, that organizational process asset or the organization project management, it could be, it's in a way, it is the organization framework for managing project. Now, why we use the term framework in that case, right, is because it could include policies, procedure, and processes. I keep repeating those things. So it's not just a single thing. So yes, organization can have their own framework for managing project, which they can build it based on the PMBOK guide, on ISO, on SUKAD, or any other, or from scratch. The organization framework that include the organizational process asset that you mentioned. Because remember, the term process asset mean a process, a procedure, a specific procedure. So the process for assessing risk, the process for estimating the project, or estimating, or the process for controlling
Cost estimate.
scope. Yeah.
Yeah.
So these are specific processes that will be included in a framework. Sorry, someone was jumping ahead. You want to elaborate? Whoever, I did not notice who it was. Okay. Any other question before we move to the next part? All right, remember, you can always ask at the end as well. Okay, next, and you notice I'm shifting color of the slide because to indicate shifting of the topic. The next topic is more on what is. So we mentioned framework, we talk about standard, we talk about method and methodology. So what is, how can we define a project management method or methodology? Right. So what is, that's the first question that I will try to answer next. And what are the essential components of a PM methodology or method? So what is a PM method? In this case, whenever you hear the word methodology, if I say method, it's clear, right? Method is something specific for a specific situation, whereas methodology is more general. So whenever I use the term methodology in this presentation or other presentation, is that typically meaning a methodological approach. That means something that have to, for example, organization today, many of them might not have an organizational project management system or procedure or method or a framework. So they do things based on every project manager way of thinking. However, if the organization establishes their organizational project management framework or system, then ideally they should have a methodological approach for managing project. This way, organization can have consistency. So not every project manager doing things their own way. There is a certain way. Okay, I mean, how strict you want to make it or not, that's a different discussion. But at least there is a systematic way of managing projects, since our interest here is managing project. Therefore, in our view, a project management methodology should be about managing the whole project. I think one of the biggest problem and confusion today in the project management community is that we use the word project management to mean everything. I mean, someone might be managing a piece of the project and that person might be given the title project manager. Or an organization might have different departments working on different pieces of the project, and then we label that project management. If we want to be a bit academic about it, and I think obviously it's up to you, you don't have to, but it would be nice to understand that whenever we use the word project, that we mean the whole project. One of the biggest problem I have had with the PMBOK guide is because, for example, it talk about the process group, initiating process group, for example, and says the initiating project process group is to manage a phase or the project. The planning process group is to plan the project or a phase. So the question, and that's what created a lot of confusion in the PM community, is that how do we know what we're talking about? Are we talking about the project or a phase? For example, when we say project charter, PMI use that term. Technically, the project charter process in the PMBOK guide is about the charter for the project or phase. And when we say this, people said, Munir, you must be going cuckoo. There is only one project charter. Well, that's not true. There is one project charter, but technically, per the PMBOK guide, every stage or phase of the project has its own charter. So in the guide, when we say project or phase, to me, it created a lot of confusion over the years. So in SUKAD way, in Munir way, is that whenever we use the word project, we're referring to the whole project. Now, what does that mean, a whole project? Okay, not a piece, not a phase, not a stage of the project, the whole project, meaning concept to closure, end to end, all the way, the whole life cycle. So obviously, definition of a project, when I say the whole project, some of the confusion start is that what is the definition of a project? I'm sure if I ask everybody, you say, everybody might give me the definition. Some people might give me the POMBAC definition, and some people might have different definition. Well, depend. And the answer is to that question is start like most of the project management question. It should always start with it depends. If you are a service provider, let's say you're a construction company, right? The construction of a project, of a facility, for you, it is a project. For the owner, it's only a phase. So the definition of a project, basically is that the definition is that based on the perspective of the person who is asking or interested. So when we talk about project management methodology, and when I say that is about the whole project, that typically we refer to the whole project concept to closure, regardless whether you are a project owner or a contractor. So from the time your organization start working on a given project, all the way till it is officially closed from your books, that is what we're looking for. Now, when we say it's obviously we use the word methodology, a methodology, and notice I'm using the word methodology here, not method, must be flexible and readily tailored to the various domain and project type. In other words, it is not a tailored method. Remember, a tailored method, if we go back to the definition from earlier, when SUKAD used the term tailored method, it means a specific method. For example, a tailored method would be for developing a small, simple software project. A tailored method would be to manage a large, complex petrochemical project. You notice how specific I am being here, right? So a tailored method, in that perspective for us, it is in line with the definition we said before as a method. And we use the word tailored because it's to reflect that it has been tailored to fit the specific scenario. So a methodology, now notice difference between method and methodology. A methodology, it should be more generic, should be more flexible, and we can use the methodological approach to develop those tailored method, as we will touch on later as well. In other words, organization can develop their tailored method from the methodological approach or from the framework as we have been discussing. That's extremely important to realize the difference here between, and I think you're starting to see in how are we converting or translating the dictionary definition of method and methodology into the application of these concepts. So what are the essential components of a PM method or methodology? And you notice on some of these slides, I have the links for some articles that on our blog site, if you'd like to get more reading on the subject. So what are the essential components? Obviously, there are a lot of components. I cannot explain everything today. However, we'll focus on the essential component. One of the most important component of a methodology is a project lifecycle. We have to define the project lifecycle. And as I had mentioned earlier, it's end-to-end. However, the word end-to-end, often doesn't give me a lot of information. So I prefer to use the word concept to closure. So from the minute the organization is considering a project, whether it comes from strategic plan or an RFP from a client, right? From the minute that a project, a topic come into the radar of the organization, okay, all the way until they close it. So cradle to grave life cycle process. And we typically, when we talk about project management and managing project, okay, and that's very important when we talk about Agile, so keep that in mind now, is that we manage project across the whole life cycle. So technically, from the minute the concept is submitted and approved by management, said, yes, it sounds like a good project we would want to work on, right? That is the start of the project life cycle. We start managing the project from that moment. Unfortunately, a lot of time what we see in the practice today and what the gaps of the community of practice is that unless we have a plan and an approved budget, project management doesn't start. No, project and even on mega project, one of the finding as we did research on the subject is that most or a large number of organizations do not have a formal project management process in those early stages of the project. SUKAD way is no. As soon as you have a concept and that concept is more or less approved, the project life cycle start and managing the project processes start. Now, since the project depend on the nature of the project, have a life cycle that could be a long time, then the project life cycle consists of phases or stages in a way. The word phases and stages are often used interchangeably. American like the term phase, British, I think they like the term stage. In SUKAD, we use both terms, as you will see later. But basically what we're saying here is that across the life cycle, which is a time span, we divide the project into sections, and we call these section phases or stages. And obviously each phase or stage in this case has a purpose and deliver an output. For example, when we talk about the feasibility stage, the purpose of that stage is to deliver an output, which is the feasibility study report. If we talk about project management plan stage, the purpose of that stage is to produce an output, which is a project management plan, right? So that's the concept that every stage usually have a very specific purpose and to deliver an output. Now the stage output, in SUKAD word, we call it the stage deliverable, and we manage a stage using the stage management processes. Now, what do we mean by this? Many of you are familiar with ISO and PMBOK guide. And in our view, and that's maybe one of the areas we think there is a gap in the PMBOK guide and in ISO, is when they talk about the process group, those are not to manage the whole project. They are to manage a stage of the project. Sure, the concept may apply on the whole project, but we need to be careful how to apply them. So in our view, we manage a project across the life cycle. I'm repeating the rose and orange here. And then we manage each stage using the stage management processes. Obviously, if it's a big project, then each stage will have to authorize that stage. We have to plan that stage. We implement or execute that stage. We control and monitor that stage. And then we close that stage, right? And then we move on to the next stage and repeat the step. So that's why the confusion sometimes in the PMBOK guide, those process group are not project stages. They are process group that repeat in every stage. Now, of course, you know, how often they repeat, what processes repeat, depend on the size of the project and the size of each stage. Now, because each stage have a purpose and deliver an output, which is a stage deliverable, it has to go through a gate. And notice I said the word it has, it must. Now, many organizations, some people will tell me, Munir, but some organizations do not have stage gate. I assure you, almost every organization have stage gate. They might not use the term. They might use the term review, approval point, interim review, whatever the case might be. But ideally, maybe it's not as formal or as strict as we would like to use them, but there are review points. Those review points are gates. Now, in our when we use the term stage gate in the project management community and in SUKAD, is basically it has usually two objectives for each gate. One is to review and approve the stage work. So for example, we did the feasibility study report. So the gate that come after that, we need to review that report, said, okay, is it okay? Does it make sense? Was it delivered and developed according to company organization standard and guideline? If yes, said, okay, approve that output, approve that deliverable. Now, even if we approve that deliverable, for some reason or another, the organization might decide to stop the project. So the next purpose of each gate, especially the early one, is that to authorize the next stage. So for the early gates, which mean gate 1 to 5 in the model that you will see later, is that at each one of those gates, we need to review the work that was done before that gate, approve it, or of course, if it requires revision, go back and request revision. But once we're ready, we approve it. And then we need to decide proceed or not, go or no go. Okay, I'm gonna pause again because I ended this part in case if there's any questions.
What I would like to add by the end of each stage gate is the concept of immediately write the lessons learned during that stage. Otherwise, usually project managers and team managers are writing down lessons learned at the closure of the project. So it's more recommended to use this concept of writing immediately the lessons learned during the stage by the end of the stage gate.
I mean, I usually do that, but not part of the stage gate. Yeah, and SUKAD and Rook, and I use the word captured lesson, and maybe next week presentation we can elaborate more on that.
Yes.
As basically is that every stage need to be closed. So part of the stage closure, actually,
Yes.
let me stop and repeat. I say it slightly differently. Lessons learned. Let me stay with lessons learned for now. Lessons learned should be happening in organizations that adopt the culture of project management, a winning culture of project management. Lessons learned should be happening throughout the project. At any given point in time, anybody identify a lesson, it should be documented in process. Right? That should be the standard practice that we recommend. And then, of course, at the end of a stage, okay, usually what we will have to do, we do two things. First is to collect all these lessons learned that has been shared throughout the stage and summarize them together to make sure they're collected if they have not been organized. And then maybe to have a discussion with the team to identify any lessons learned that were not identified earlier. So collection of lessons learned that has been captured while the stage is progressing, and then take a look back, a retroactive, and at the stage, and then see if there's anything else that the team would like to document. And we do that usually part of the stage closure, okay, which is typically in CAMMP and Uruk is after the gate. Okay. Any other question? I think there's something in the chat. Let me. This is where I need to learn how to do this properly. For some reason, I cannot see the chat. Hang on. Yes. Do we consider monitoring and controlling as a project phase? No. Monitoring and controlling is a process that is should be happening in parallel to all the phases and stages. So it's not something that we consider a phase. And we've seen many industries, they use that as a phase. But that's typically wrong because it should be happening in parallel. However, I have a clarification here. And I think Raya is asking, Raya is coming from a development and from in the development or NGOs world, there is something called monitoring and evaluation. Okay, so when we use the term monitoring and evaluation, which is similar to monitoring and control, usually in funded project by NGOs, by country or government or United Nations, they will have at the end of the project, they might have, in addition to monitoring and control throughout the project, they might have a separate effort that's called monitoring evaluation. And that is usually for the team to be reporting on the fund that they have been granted to the donor. So they usually do that. In those situations, monitoring and evaluation could be considered as a phase of the project because it could be happening at the end. depending on, again, the donor requirement in each country, and donor organization might have something different. So that is monitoring evaluation is a term that is something very specific to NGOs and nonprofit. However, in project management, it's similar to monitoring and controlling, but monitoring or controlling, it's happening from the concept of the project. Any other question? Okay, if not, let me go back to screen sharing. And then continue with the presentation. We see the screen again, right?
Right.
Okay. So basically, just a quick catch up on what we've discussed. The first part, we discussed the definition, method versus methodology, and then how we apply that in the real world by talking about what are the components of a PM methodology. Now, before I leave this topic here, obviously, when we say, I mean, I'm only focusing on the main concept here. When we say there is stage gate, usually there has to be a criteria of stage gate, including who need to be at this gate, and of course that might vary from one organization to another, or from one gate to another. Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you have a gate for a feasibility study, the people who might be sitting there reviewing that gate might be different than if you are reviewing the project management plan. So I'm just introducing the concept here. Also, the stage deliverable, what goes in it, obviously depend on what stage. And a feasibility stage, there might be some component, and concept stage and requirement stage. Each stage have different components that need to go in it and to be part of the stage deliverable. So I'm not elaborating a lot over here on the detail, but basically these are the essential component. We need to have a PLC. We need to have phases or stages. We need to have stage deliverables. We need to have stage gates. Okay, now I'm shifting to the community misunderstanding, and that's usually, I'm sure some of you knows sometimes this can become quite annoying, and there are a lot of debate in the project management community about Agile and Waterfall. And so I cannot talk, and basically, of course, they talk about Agile project management method or Waterfall project management method. So do these things exist? Is there Agile project management? Is there Agile project management methodology? Is there a Waterfall project management methodology? So let me try to answer our perspective. And of course, this is usually quite a debated topic online. So I'm sure maybe some of the audience today might not even agree with me, but let's talk about it. First, straightforward, being direct. Agile is not, it is not a project management methodology. It is not a project management method. Now, why? Let's talk. Whenever we read posts online on Agile and Agile PM, and when you start to read the article or the post or the message or even the picture sometimes are shared, we notice it's often confusion, and sometimes we think that confusion is on purpose. It's not accidental or innocent. Sometimes it is done on purpose. It is talk about agility. So there's a difference between agility and agile. Agility is about being dynamic, flexible, responsive to change. This is why we talk about business agility. We talk about project agility. We're talking about organizational agility. So basically what that means is that organizations should be flexible, should be responsive to change. It's not like you do a strategic plan and you set it in stone, and then for the next 5 years, we have to follow it to the letter, right? Organizations that do this fail. This is why in using strategic management terminology, usually organization could have a formula, can go get their board or director or executive team to go offsite. They formulate a strategic plan, and they call that a deliberate strategy, the way they do it. But then once they start implementing their strategy, you should be collecting feedback from the community, from the market, from their client, from their employees. And as a result, there will be some emergent trend, and they need to adjust. The biggest example of this, I think, what we've been going through the last year or so was the COVID-19, was a pandemic, and how has that affected every organization and every. I mean, now we are going to see a lot of organization pivoting with a lot of ways to the way we work, the way we design buildings, the way we design airports, the way we design our office space. All of this, if organizations are going to stick to the old way of doing things, sooner or later they're going to face a lot of problems. So agility is great to have. It's a must to have. And any mature organization or organization that really believe in growing are usually they have adopted agility in their way of doing business. So whenever we see posts that talking about agility or agile, always be careful and read it to see, are they talking about agility, even though they might be using the word agile, or are they talking about agile? Now, what is agile? Okay, well, unfortunately, we don't know. And I don't mean that in a joking way. I really do not know. Because as you read online presentation, we've seen, we've seen agile contracting, we've seen agile project management, we've seen agile HR, agile PMO. The word agile is being inserted in everything, so we don't even know what it means. And there is no clear definition of the word agile anywhere except agile as being, flexible, agility. So a lot of people now are trying to insert the word agile into everything they do because agile is popular. So it makes sense. So if I want to develop a nice methodology, it's agile, I might be able to get more attention and sell it. However, obviously, in my view, that could be on the border of being unethical. Let's not go there. I just want to make sure to say it. So we don't know what agile is, but I think we know what it is not, which is not a PM methodology. Now, what do we know about agile? Obviously, agile or the concept of agile started to happen years ago, or maybe some people talk about maybe even 30 plus years ago. However, we started to hear more about it early 2000 when those guys go out somewhere and they develop what they call the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. And that where the word agile started to become popular. And that is how it started to become more and more in use, which is about agile software development. If you go back to the manifesto itself and you read that has 4 values and 12 principles, if you go and read them, I'm 99% sure, I'm just leaving myself 1% for error, that the word manage a project is not anywhere to be seen. It's all focusing on the development of a product. In that case, it was the development of a software. And of course, it become more popular nowadays. We said, well, agile is about the development of product. So in reality, the way I understand agile, what I think it is, and I don't know for sure because there is no organization that have standardized a definition for this, is that most likely it is about iterative or incremental development. Meaning what? Meaning when you develop something, right, instead of doing all the work, you go planning, design, analysis, and stages, and then you go develop the whole product in one shot and you deliver to your customer one product maybe a year or 2 later. It's said, let's not do it this way, let's do it incrementally or iteratively. And the difference between them is iterative is like you develop something, and then the next cycle you improve on it, and the next cycle you improve on it, right? Imagine you are developing a document, okay? You develop the document, you put the outline, you start writing, and then maybe later on you come back and then you improve on it and you add more content, and then later on you add more content. Incremental is usually said, okay, I'm gonna develop something incrementally. That means I'm gonna develop, let's say, software. I will develop the software, the minimal viable product with XYZ features. And then release, that's the initial release. Then the second release, I will add some more functionality. And the third release, I will add more functionality. That's incremental development. So basically, by following this kind of approach, incremental iterative, in a way, what we are saying is that let's not do a big bang. Meaning what? Let's not work on the project And we continue to work and develop, work and develop, work and develop. And at the end of the day, a year or two later, we release in a big bang the product to our customer. What you're saying is that do it in increment. Now, this is make a lot of sense if your product can be developed in increment. Right? If your product cannot be developed in increment, obviously then you cannot use Agile. So depend on the nature of your product. If the product can be developed incrementally in pieces, and here is a big confusion in the market, right? Because some people say, let's build the foundation. That's an increment. No, that's not an increment, right? Why? Because when we talk about the Agile Manifesto or anything else, when they talk about incremental development, they are talking about continuous delivery of a product of value to the client. Now, value to the client means the client can start using. If I build the foundation, the customer cannot use it. They're not going to be able to go sell apartment. If we're building an apartment building because we built the foundation. I mean, they might be able to sell, but not because they built the foundation, right? So the customer cannot use that product. We cannot use that product until the building is finished. So in a situation where incremental development doesn't work, obviously, what we mean is that, again, I need to repeat myself. Increment in this case, we're not talking about doing work packages. We're talking about delivering an increment that has been designed, built, and handed over to the customer for use, to put into beneficial operation where they can start to get the benefit of it. That's increment. Again, I'm being very particular about this because it's, again, in my view, it is very important. Now, having said that, so Agile, the way we see it, is most likely about iterative or incremental development of a product, which means it is about the development or implementation stage of a project. So when can I start developing the product? Software, right? When I start coding, when I go into design, maybe with a vendor and start working on it. When do I start implementing a building? When I start engineering or construction, right? So it is, in that case, as a development. In that case, if Agile, if incremental development is possible, it is happening only in a stage, which it also mean is a development approach, not a management approach, right? So when we talk about Agile software development, it's an approach, as a guideline, as a mindset. Those people like to use the term mindset to develop a software, to develop a product. It's not about managing the work. Okay, there's difference between management. Yes, as we develop the product, there is some element of management going on. However, when we talk about managing the stage or managing the project, Agile in that case doesn't apply. So what is Agile? I think it could be just a trendy word that Agile is used without context or understanding. Recently, I wrote an article about Agile contracting. Somebody was asking me about that. And I struggled because somebody, reached out to Munir, a guy who's doing a master's degree, and asked for my help. And then during the discussion during a Zoom meeting, I told him I'm struggling to help you. I don't know how to help you, because when they use the term Agile contracting, what do they mean by that? Because to me, Agile means two things: either agility, sometimes people using the term Agile to mean agility, or it means incremental or iterative development. So on the contracting word, in construction, contracting in construction, what does it mean? Are we producing the contract in increment? Are we talking about building the project in increment? So I needed to do some more research on the subject before I can answer, and that topic might deserve a special webinar dedicated to that topic. So that, and on this one slide is where our view is that Agile is definitely not a project management methodology. I mean, if you want to use the word method, but call it a development method, I can live with that. Yeah, but to say it's a project management methodology, it's not. Why not as well? One more item I did not have on the slide, because it's only on the development phase. It doesn't cover the project concept to closure. Remember what a definition in the earlier discussion? A PM method has to be, in our view, again, I'm being opinionated here, is concept to closure, covering the project lifecycle, the whole project, not a piece of the project, right? If you want to call it stage management, that's fine with me as well, right? But it is a development approach, is not a management approach. Waterfall is fun. I think I wrote this in one of my articles, is that I've never heard the word waterfall, except of course, the nature waterfall, those, was water, was real water. Okay. I've never heard the word waterfall in project management context until I heard about Agile. And that was maybe 10 years ago. And I have been in project management for more than 35 years. Okay, so for maybe the first 25 years of my career in engineering and project management, I've never heard the word waterfall project management. So I think it became the scapegoat. It became, for those Agilists to promote Agile, they start to use the term waterfall. Unfortunately, there are people who use the term waterfall. Now, I know I've done some research, and I can't remember the exact reference, but somebody said that there is one book or maybe some reference that was written years ago that talked about waterfall. I think it was in relation to software development. But there are, it's not something you can go find easily online, where you can find, any discussion or paper or books about waterfall project management. So here again, confusion is king, with so many misconceptions about project management. So we do not know what waterfall project management means. Although, based on many of the discussion online and some of the posts we've seen, typically what we are seeing is that when Agilists usually are using the word waterfall, is typically they use it as a synonym to traditional project management. So basically the old way of doing things, right? And of course, it doesn't end there. It's usually, in their mind, it's a bad way of doing things. Now, before we go on, I'm going to pause here and then give any people a chance to speak. Think about this. How does a waterfall work? And by waterfall, I mean, the nature waterfall, the Niagara Falls, right? How does it work? Well, what is the principle about this? Let me pause, and anybody would like to jump in? Wake up, guys.
Yes, Munir, I can take it, please.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that waterfall work means sequential activities running in certain sequence. Okay. So, and one activity is depending on the other one, which is the predecessor. Okay. So something around that.
Okay.
And all activities are leading to a certain goal.
Okay. Work in phases one, and so somebody mentioned here as well, work in phases one by one until the end. Okay. Technically, what you guys both said is theoretically correct, right? So it is phases. However, my point here, is that think about nature, a waterfall, water flow down, right? Doesn't flow back up. So in a process, when people, the reason the word waterfall is being used is that what both of you guys have mentioned is that it's sequential, but, and this is a big but, that mean it's one-way flow, right? There is no feedback. There is no going back. Yes, one activity depends on the other, but if something is wrong, I cannot change. And that's the argument that Agilist people doing. That you have to plan everything to be perfect from the beginning. You design everything, you plan everything, and then you go and execute everything, and you cannot change anything. Okay, this is the argument that usually the Agile people are giving about waterfall. So in a way, uh, uh, so basically what Amr was saying is, what we call waterfall is mostly a sequential process, which is 100% correct. It is a sequential process, but it is not 100% sequential. What does that mean? That means there could be, in a waterfall, water flowing down without stop, and it doesn't go in stages unless, the waterfall has stages. So, uh, so basically what that means is that I don't have to wait to the end of a phase to start the next phase. I could overlap, right? So sequential, yeah, there is a logical sequence. However, there could be a degree of overlap. That's one thing that what make, and this is the reason I call this slide waterfall is not a logical PM methodology, because the waterfall logic is that water continues to flowing down nonstop and it doesn't go back up. However, in project management, yes, we might have a sequential process, but first we might have an overlap. And second, we have feedback. We have feedback loops and that review point, and we can introduce change. If something we've done before and we don't like it and we like to do change, we can issue a change order and then we can do it. So it's not like it is just solid 100% break, do this, finish, do the next. So that's not why it is. What I'm saying is waterfall, yes, could exist, but it's not 100% logical. To use it in project management, or practical, maybe the another word. Also, if we think about the project management methodology, what most people don't, that when we think about concept to closure, what most people ignore is that the process is iterative. Yeah. For example, let me explain this point. We use the term scope out of context. For example, the project statement of work or the project idea, it's about scope, but that could be one sentence. I want to build a residential tower that is 10-story high. That is scope, right? That is a scope statement, but it's very high level scope. When we start any new project, okay, or we want to build a new hotel, right? That is usually at the very beginning in the concept stage of the project, we identify we want to build like a hotel to accommodate 100 guest room, okay, and 3-star or 4-star hotel. That's usually done. That's it. That's a concept. Then we might go later on to feasibility. Say, okay, now we need to explain more location, different regulation, laws. When we go then to, so basically what that means, now the scope is expanded. Then we go to the next stage, which is requirement, defining the requirement. We want to have conference room. We want to have dining facilities. We want to have a swimming pool, right? So we start to define these requirements. So we're still talking about scope, yeah? But now the focus is expanded. So let's say while we are working on this and we discovered, look, to achieve our objective, instead of 10-story hotel, we needed to make it 11. What, can we do that? Of course, we issue a change request or change order and we do that. Does it mean we have to go back all the way and start all over again? Of course not, right? So as we, in the front end of the project, we do some iteration. We start to define the scope, we expand on it, we elaborate, we expand, we elaborate, until we are ready to go into engineering and construction, assuming it's an engineering job. So in a way, what Agilists are creating a myth that waterfall or non-agile, everything is set in stone and no looking back. And that's of course not the case. That's one. And now before I close this slide, I have to go back to the concept as well. Waterfall is not traditional project management. A lot of people talk about waterfall to make it sound traditional project management. What is traditional project management? And that's another thing I don't like to use, right? Project management, okay, it's project management. From the time we start to use that term project management to today, project management is project management. You might have different tools and technique, in scheduling, in the old days, they used to do it by hand. Now we have software. In the old days, they used to have the arrow diagramming technique now. And now we have the precedence diagramming technique. In the old days, we talk about maybe risk. We did not even have risk maybe in our plan. Now we have risk. So what we are saying is that project management always has been evolving. And a good, mature organization and competent project manager realize always that project management is an adaptive process. We have to adopt our project management methodology, our method. We have to adapt our approach to the project specific. Managing a small project is different than managing a big project. Managing multiple small projects is different than managing a big project. Managing a project in IT is different than managing a project in pharmaceutical industry. So we've got to learn and adopt. The principles are there. However, we have to modify them. So in a good methodology, in a good methodological approach, the principle, the life cycle are often the same, whether you want to use Big Bang or you want to use Agile, right? And maybe I'll touch on that in the next few slides. So from that perspective, is that a traditional project management is that project management. It's not waterfall, okay? Project management, what you will see later on when I talk about CAMP, that is in a way a traditional project management, but it is agile or it has agility. Maybe I should be careful in how I use this. Let me continue, and then we will we'll stop for a final question at the end. And talk about CAMP. And if you notice, this is a book I published more than 3 years ago. And I purposely use the title Project Management Beyond Waterfall and Agile, because we need to go beyond. We need to stop debating Waterfall and Agile. So we had developed CAMP years ago, and then we published this book about it. So what is CAMP? And why CAMP is a methodology, not a method? Maybe I'll give you a hint there. Well, what is CAMP? And I'll be quick because I do not want to spend a lot of time on this. The customized and adaptable methodology for managing project. It is part of the SUKAD way. The intent of CAMP is to use the standard model to develop tailored method. I don't want to go through there. We have talked about this quite a bit already. It is a concept to closure project lifecycle model, which is, as you see here, it's concept to closure. It has phases and stages. It has gates. That the standard model. Now, the idea is that we want to take that standard model and develop into a methodology. So in this case, why is it a methodology, not a method? Because it uses a set of methods that are tailored to fit a given domain or industry. So for example, in pharma, real estate, industrial technology, it has to fit the project type, and it takes into consideration project size and complexity. I want to skip the slide. And I talked about the servant leadership initiative earlier today, so I don't need to repeat it. It's here, but at least on this slide, I have the links. So later on, when you go back to the presentation, you can see that. I'm done. Thank you. I just noticed, I think we are just finished on time, but I will be happy to take a few questions if people are still around and would like to ask. So feel free to jump in.
Munir, how do you see the compliance between waterfall and system development life cycle?
You're asking the wrong question. I mean, the right question to the wrong person. I'm not into system development, so I don't know what a system development would look like.
A couple of weeks ago, Bill Duncan posted a comment on an Agile thread, and he advised to look waterfall as for software development and SDLC just for systems development. Of course, from system development lifecycle. Actually, system development lifecycle is more intended for projects considering an IT combined hardware with the software development.
Yeah.
I mean, let's say on a management information system or an enterprise ERP, and so on. But of course, there is a parallel compliance between the two, I mean, waterfall and SDLC. Maybe not 100%, but the system development lifecycle uses in a somewhat manner the same way with those well-known phases or stages from waterfall, but with those feedback loops for around each stage.
Yeah. Again, I wish I know more. I could be able to elaborate.
Yes, I write something on your
okay.
email.
All right. Other question?
And just remembering about your statement made by the beginning of this parallel between Agile and Waterfall. Neither in the Agile Manifesto nor in the 12 Agile Principles, one cannot find the terms method, management, methodology, iterative, or repetitive.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I said 99% because just I left myself a chance of error.
Yes, they are not present in those.
No, this is about developing the software. It's about, you know, how can we do better in developing software, right?
But the terms methodology or management, they don't appear.
Yeah. Any other question or comment?
Hi, Munir. This is Nada.
Hi, Nada.
Thank you. Hi, thank you very much for this very good, like really informative presentation, a lot of ideas. And of course, I'm really interested about the waterfall and agile because I just passed the PMP and I went through these terms a lot in my last exam. I just want to mention something that in the BIMBOK, they did mention a lot about the agile, the agile methodology, what the term they used. But in the same time, they did use another term when they mentioned the word agile, they mentioned the adaptive life cycle. Yeah. They always mention that in the BIMBOK. They even differentiate between the traditional way of managing project management methodology with the word of productive life cycle. So that's how they differentiate these two ways of managing. Like you said, I agree with you. It's not managing project. It's more about development process. Yeah. So I just want to highlight with these two words and what is your comments about them. Adaptive, even though you mentioned adaptive in waterfall, but they did mention it's in the agile approach.
I mean, what PMI is trying to do, and remember, PMI is always follower, not a leader, because it follows based on what the community is using. And the community is using, and they try, because they want to promote agile, they come up to, okay, what can we talk about? What can we call the traditional PM? And they come up and said, well, in the real world, you can use only one or two things. You can use the predictive or adaptive. Now, what does that mean by predictive? Predictive, that means we can predict the end. At the end, I want to have a facility. I want to have a building. Well, that's basically whoever said that probably do not understand project management, because nobody can predict anything. Yeah, we can design and work toward achieving a certain goal, but it's not predictive in the sense that everything is set in stone or everything is fixed. As we start working on project, we adapt, we change, we modify based on the need. Ideally, in construction, we don't like to make changes late, but anyway, so this is a long discussion, but basically PMI tried to use the term for the sequential or the traditional or what waterfall. They try to use the term predictive, okay, which is, I really do not agree with it because we cannot predict in project management. That's one. And they use the word adaptive because it's tailoring. But again, that is where the volunteer, who mostly come from technology background, do not understand that project management, since the nuclear bomb was created in the Manhattan Project, it's always been adaptive. We never use the same project management approach to manage all projects. The problem is that a lot of people used to think of the PMBOK as a methodology. And as PMI started to transition commercially from the PMP to Agile, they are starting to throw these terms. And in my view, they are really not being vetted properly. and is being used by a lot of those people who are making a lot of money from Agile. And the 7th edition, to my understanding, I haven't seen it yet. I've seen some writing about it. It's even worse. And now, I think for about the last 10 years, PMI has been promoting Agile. And I think finally they discovered, well, Agile doesn't work. So now they've been promoting hybrid. So in the new PMBOK, there are a lot of focus on hybrid. So what is a hybrid? Oh, we combine Agile and Waterfall. Then we are back to traditional project management. Even this company that PMI bought, Discipline Agile, when we talked to them and said, Agile is about development, said, no, it's a whole life cycle. Then that is traditional project management. Traditional project management is adaptive. This is why I always like to say adaptive. It has always been adaptive, always, right? You adapt based on the scenario, on the situation. You adapt based on the size and complexity of the project. So that is very important. But PMI are trying to link the word adaptive to Agile. And I personally do not agree with that. Because if we're saying that, that means only Agile exists. There is no other, and of course, we already said Agile is not a project management method. So I think what we have to be careful, and I do not want to be really too outspoken here today, is that we need to be able to really read between the line between real project management and commercial project management. And PMP being a cash cow that is dying, it is time for the Agile cash cow. I will leave it at that. Other comment or question?
Yeah, question, Munir, please, on the CAMMP methodology. So where the project charter is developed in this methodology, because you know that the project charter should include the budget, the scope of work, definite information. However, if you start the project from idea, as you mentioned in the CAMMP, so all these information are not existing at this moment.
Yeah, and maybe next week presentation will elaborate more, but I think the key question here, you use a word that is the charter should have definite information.
Yeah.
And we disagree with that.
Okay.
The charter should not have definitive information, right? This is the iteration I was talking about in the presentation. The charter, and actually, when you look at the charter today, and if you look at the market, even the project charters that PMI talk about, there are some people that they have the charter to be one-page document, and some people the charter to be like 20-page document. So yes, of course, if you come from a background that the charter has to be detailed, then I would agree with your choice of word of using definitive detail, right? Mm-hmm. So in that case, but however, we think that's anti-iterative. A proper methodology, iterative methodology, it should be iterative, such as CAMMP. What do we mean by that? That means the charter document is an authorization document that would have a rough budget. This is why in CAMMP, in the feasibility stage, the second stage, we have what we call the class 1 estimate, the first estimate on the project. It does have budget information, it does have schedule information, it does have many other things, but they are high level and they're not definitive. Okay, we cannot get to a definitive level of detail until we are get to stage 5 in CAMMP. And why do we do that? We do that because we do not want to spend a lot of time and money on the project early on and then end up canceling this, right? So what do? What we want to do is that what I like to call the lazy project manager principle. We want to do as little as possible in every stage to allow us to go to the next stage. Because management in that case can decide, look, we just spent little money over here, the project should be canceled. Or we're going to continue. So we continue, we develop, we add more detail, we do iteration and we do more detail. And then we come back and visit it again at gate 3, and then at gate 4 until gate 5. Let me just give you an example here from the mega project world. Mega, we're talking about the billions of dollar project. One of the biggest problems that cause failure in mega project is something called the lock-in effect. The lock-in effect meaning what? We start early. Let's say we project charter the way you mentioned with detail early on. right? And then we get locked in. And we would probably have to spend a few $1 million on a mega project to get to that point. And then later on, if the information said, well, this project should not go on anymore, and management will come back and said, we're locked in. We already spent a lot of money. How could we cancel? We should go on, right? And that is creating disasters, even on the mega project world. So what we are saying in CAMMP is that, look, we do not want to make disaster, even on a small project, okay? For example, in the concept stage, the project description could be 2 sentences, and that should be good enough for us to understand the concept, okay? If the concept is acceptable and management approve it, then management will say, okay, spend a little bit more money. And then we go out, spend a little bit more money, and we elaborate, and then we go to another gate, and management can say, now, yeah, it makes sense, continue. So in a way, what we're doing, instead of spending a lot of time and effort to get to the project charter, let's say for argument's sake, on a big project as $1 million, right? And then get the project canceled, why can't we spend that $1 million over a longer period of time and do it in pieces? Spend 50,000 first, and then spend 100,000, and then maybe spend 200,000, okay? And then when we could cancel the project at 50,000 mark, so instead of spending $1 million and then cancel, we can spend 50 and then, it doesn't make sense, let's cancel. Or it's good, let's continue. So that is what we call iterative project management. And that's what CAMMP is built on. Maybe down the road, we will have a special presentation on CAMMP. We can elaborate further.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Dr. Mayel saying, choose the most appropriate lifecycle model in pre-project phase in order to successfully apply the most appropriate methodology. Yes. I mean, that's where we need to project success and failure. And we're going to have a discussion on project success maybe in 2 or 3 weeks. A project success and failure is often determined in the feasibility study. And because we don't use a proper methodology, or we don't use a methodology at all. Other question? All right. It took us a little bit longer than anticipated, but it's good. At least most of those who attended are still around. So thank you. I appreciate your time. We'll probably be sending you a feedback survey later on to give us your feedback. Tell us what we did right, what we did wrong. Be critical. We don't mind. We cannot improve. We want to do this webinar often, and we cannot improve unless we get your honest feedback. So be as direct as possible. Saturday, we have another session, but that session is open discussion. So I will not have a presentation. It's about let us be agile. So it's about agile. But again, it's open discussion. I'm not going to be, I will only facilitate to maintain the discussion around the topic, around the theme. It's not a presentation. So the process we're going to be following, every Wednesday, we will do a webinar. Every Saturday, we will do a group discussion. And of course, you can get benefit also from the other meetings that we are announcing. Okay, if no more comment, thanks everybody. Maybe I can get some sleep now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Munir.
Thank you guys, take care. So anybody want?
Thank you, Munir. Thank you, Munir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye to all.
Appreciate.